Just because a person is legally classified in a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that that is quintessentially the definition of who they are. For example, if a person is acquitted in a court of law and declared innocent, that doesn't necessarily suggest that the person is an honest, righteous person. It's just that they couldn't be convicted in the court of law. Similarly, on Rosh Hashanah, when God judges us as a people, the Talmud tells us that every person stands in front of God like on a balance scale with their deeds. And if the majority of their deeds are good deeds, 51% good deeds and 49% bad deeds, God declares them as a tzaddik, as a righteous person, and rewards them with a good year. If a person is 50-50, so the Talmud says God declares them as the Beinoni, the intermediary person. We have to wait and see their choices for the coming year. And if a person has majority bad deeds, 51% bad deeds and 49% good deeds, then they're called the Rasha, they're the sinner, and God treats them accordingly. Now, that's the definition in the court of law, the way God will treat you in terms of reward and punishment. But that is not the quintessential, essential definition of what the tzaddik is. A true tzaddik in its spiritual form is, as David HaMelech, King David, who was a great tzaddik, he said about himself, "V'libi halal b'kirbi." My heart is empty within me, which means he no longer had a yetzer hara. He no longer had any force, any inclination that led him towards doing bad. He was like a perfect person, always doing something right. That's the definition of a tzaddik. Now you can imagine there are not many tzaddikim in the world, because who is always so perfect and so pure, always doing that which is correct? Which is why the Medrash tells us that God was looking through his storage house of souls, and he saw that there are very few that can ever actually become a true tzaddik, the truly righteous person. And so he sprinkled them and spread them around every single generation. So every generation should have at least a few of these holy tzaddikim. However, for most of us, we would at best be the Beinoni, at best be the intermediary person. The intermediary person does not mean 50-50, as it means in a court of law. It means a person, as we learned yesterday, even Rabbah, who always is doing good, never is engaged in bad, yet for some reason they're still called the intermediary person because they still fall short of being the true tzaddik. What does that mean? You know, we use the term tzaddik very lightly sometimes. A guest is coming to town, or we call somebody, you're a tzaddik, you're a holy, righteous person. So it's a nice thing to call people, and it makes them feel better. But we want to understand on a spiritual level, on a genuine level, what these personas are. And therefore, the rest of this work is dedicated to exploring not the holy tzaddik, because that's not for most people, but what is this Beinoni in between? And so, based on all these introductions with the quotes from Talmud and the quotes from Zohar and all these classifications, now the book unfolds to try to explore what this is. The Alter Rebbe introduces a really groundbreaking teaching rooted in the teachings of Kabbalah, the teachings of the Arizal, quoted by his student Rabbi Chaim Vital. And he says, normally we think, and we're told, especially in the Talmud, for example, that every person has a yetzer tov and a yetzer hara, a good inclination and an evil inclination. A good inclination which leads one to do good, a bad one which leads one to do unhealthy things. However, it's truly much more than that. It's not just that we all have two inclinations. We actually all possess two souls. Two souls, which means two complete, different, separate personas. We all have within us two different kinds of people. Every single soul has its own mind, its own heart, its own opinions, its own feelings. And we have two identities within us at all times. That's a groundbreaking idea. And we're going to be exploring the nature of that, the two people that we have within us over the next many chapters. In the rest of today's portion, the Alter Rebbe will tell us about one of the souls. One of these souls is called the soul from Klippa. Klippa means appeal, and it's normally as a term used when something is unholy, seeming like it comes from evil, just like the peel covers over the fruit. So to this soul, even though within it is the life force and the existence of God and godliness. However, it's completely covered over. Godliness is hidden from within. And therefore, because of the concealment, it becomes unholy. And there doesn't seem to be the presence of God over there. Another word for this soul is sitra achra, from the other side, meaning not from the holy side. Of course, it's a soul of God, but it's not apparent to be that way. It comes from the other side. What does this soul contribute? What does it do to us? So the Alter Rebbe gives three different roles or consequences, results, effects from this soul. The first is that this soul is the soul which gives you vitality, which gives you life force, which gives you in a bodily, physical, physiological way your life, similar to that of an animal. Just like an animal lives and breathes and eats and is tired and exercises and all the bodily features that it does, on that level, the human is very similar. So when we need to eat, or we're tired, or the way our reproductive system works, or all the other systems in our body, is all controlled or caused by this soul of vitality. Next, the second thing this soul does is it's the source of all of our negative emotions, unhealthy emotions, and character traits. Because it comes from klipa, it comes from the evil, the peel that which covers over and conceals God. Therefore, it leads to unhealthy character traits. And these character traits come from the four different elements of this soul, because we know it's brought down in it's a tradition in ancient Jewish sources that everything that exists in this world consists of four elements, whether they're physical elements, metaphysical elements, but these elements are fire, water, air, and earth. And you have this idea in non-Jewish writings as well. So that's what everything is composed of. Similarly, this soul is composed of the four elements. The fire element within this soul, what does that lead to? What kind of negative emotions does that breed? Well, let's think about fire. Fire, its nature is always to go upwards, almost like the opposite of gravity, always tries to lift itself higher and higher. That leads to emotions such as arrogance. Arrogance is when you pick yourself up over others. Anger. Anger is when also in a state of rage. In a rage, you're sort of in a tensely worked up state over others. Maybe being judgmental, being condescending, being shameful, shaming others. All of those traits come from the fire element in the soul. The water element of the soul, what does that lead to? So water is known as a metaphor for pleasure, because water nurtures trees, fruits, delicious sweet fruits. So water nurtures pleasure. So the character traits of a person indulging in pleasure, in inappropriate pleasures, a person who has lusts and desires and infatuations and all of those inappropriate loves and gravitations in life, which are unhealthy for us, they come from the water element. Next is the earth, the wind element. Wind is like hot air. It's almost like an emptiness. There's no real substance over there. So the element of wind in the soul causes emotions in the same way. What kind of emotions? Being lightheaded, mocking others, being cynical, being a jokester, not being a serious person, being superficial. All of those emotions also come from the air element of the soul. And finally, the earth element. Earth is heavy. Earth always falls to the lowest place. And that causes within a person emotions that are also heavy, such as depression, laziness, complacency, being cynical, having no self-esteem. All of those kinds of character traits and emotions come from the earth element within the soul. So that's number two. The soul is the source of all negative and unhealthy emotions and characteristics. Point number three, interestingly, is that this soul can also be the source of good emotions and good character traits. You see, even though we said this soul is the klipa soul, which means it's made of peels which cover over and conceal godliness and truth from within, but it's known as a klipa, as klipat noga, a klipa of light, which means there's a certain mix within it. It's true that the peel covers over the identity of truth and God from within, but it also has within it a redeeming factor, a God factor, which also is not completely imprisoned within it, and it could be exposed and it could be uncovered. It's like, if you recall in the Torah, we have the tree of Eitz Hadas Tov Vara, the tree of knowledge of good and evil that Adam and Eve made the mistake and ate from. So this soul has within it a composite of good and evil. Because of its element of good, of that which is uncovered within the soul, it can also lead to good character traits and emotions, such as being kind, being compassionate. They can also come from this soul. Because having these good character traits, and it may be even genuine. When you do a favor for somebody else, it may be truly because you care about that person. So it's a good emotion. However, it's not necessarily a holy emotion. A holy emotion would be when you're doing something for a godly purpose. Whereas a good emotion means you have a genuine interest in the other person, and it may possibly be driven not necessarily by a godly, holy soul, which we haven't yet discussed yet, but just by your very human soul, the soul of vitality, which causes you to be a human being, and therefore naturally you may have a disposition to want to be kind and compassionate towards others. Finally, the Alter Rebbe says that this is the soul that all Jewish people have, or all righteous Gentiles have. Anybody who believes and has that kind of attachment to God has this soul of klipa. However, somebody who's an idolater, someone who's a wicked person, somebody who's a heretic, they have a different kind of soul. It comes from a different source of klipa, a different source of evil, or the peels, a peel which not only covers over the light and the truth of God, but it actually completely blocks and it imprisons the light of God within it, so it's impossible to ever be revealed. Therefore, those that have that kind of soul actually are unable to do anything truly good. Meaning, when they do a good deed or they're compassionate for somebody else, it's always with an agenda. It's always with an agenda of what will I gain? How will I get rewarded? Whether it's a physical reward or a spiritual reward, but it's never something truly in the interest and for the sake of somebody else. So in summary, we've learned that there are two kinds of klipa. There are two kinds of forces of evil, that which covers over the light of God. And we've learned that there are, we could say, three different ways that a person could have a good character trait. Right? There's also negative character traits, which we spoke about. But the revolutionary idea here is that there are three different kinds of good character traits. One is the very unholy good character trait. Doing a favor, being kind and compassionate for an unholy reason, for an agenda, for what to gain. The second is the neutral, possibly genuine, but neutral good character trait. You truly want to do something good for somebody else because you love them, because you care about them, and it's for their sake. That may come not from the holy soul, but just from the very human soul. Finally, as we're going to learn tomorrow, there are holy good character traits, where the reason, the motivation to be kind and compassionate and giving for others has a truly holy, godly agenda to it, which we'll learn more about in future days. So that's a very unique teaching that sort of shakes up a lot of how we think about ourselves and the world, and there's more to come. Have a blessed day. Make it very special.